name is Ainku. Let's get to it. This story starts in the Vladimirovich family home. The father, Pyotr, is outside in their barn and he's helping a sheep give birth. And while he's doing that in the barn, this is like winter time. The family is all huddled up inside of the house, a cabin, old Russia times, and they're listening to the nursemaid tell a story, an old Russian myth about the Winter King, Frost, Karachun, Morozko, many names, but essentially he is like the spirit of winter. And she's telling this story to the entire family. And the very bare bones of it is that there is a family and there are these two girls. One is a girl whose mother died when she was young, and then a stepmother came in, and then the stepmother had a kid. And so the stepmother hated the first kid, and so she told the dad to send his kid out into the winter. And she goes out there and she actually meets Morozko, and she's like very cordial and shit with him, even though he's threatening her. And so he's like, you're an upstanding person, and he gives her gifts and he sends her back to the house. And when the stepmom sees this, she's like, what? Like, my daughter is way better than that daughter. So she sends her daughter out, and her daughter is rude and shit, and then she actually freezes and dies out there. And you know, it's a parable about manners and morality and this and that. But as she finishes telling this tale, the father, Pyotr, comes inside and he's like, yo, the birth was a success. And then his wife, Marina, tells him, she's like, I'm about to have a kid. And I know it's going to be a girl, just like my mother knew I was going to be a girl. And Marina, interesting thing about her is that she's the stepdaughter of the Prince of Moscow, because she had wandered out of the woods and she just like was a girl that came out of nowhere, and she was just full of miracles and people just loved her. So she eventually just like became a part of the royal family. And then she got in a political marriage with Pyotr because he's peripheral royalty, and so she gets married to him out into the boonies where he rules over. So Pyotr is like, I don't know if you'll survive the winter if you have this child. And she's like, I don't care. Like, I know I have to have this child. This means everything to me. And she gives birth to a young girl named Vazia. And this book is mostly about Vazia's life. And in the process of that, Marina dies, leaving Pyotr very heartbroken because he absolutely loved her. Vazia is born and she's like a weird sickly child, but she survives her first winter. And after that, she gets really, really strong. Year by year, she's just like developing really quickly. And when she's like 5, 6, she wanders out into the woods and she like enters like a little magical grove, and there's this big tree there. And under that tree is an old craggly man with one eye. And she walks up to him and he's like, my name is Medved. And she's like, oh, like, what's up? And he starts like reaching out for her. And he's like, won't you help me? And she starts reaching out, and then this figure on a horse comes galloping through and scares her off, and she just runs all the way back home. Because she had entered this like magical grove, she was missing for hours. So people were out finding her. The search party finds her when she returns. Her older brother, Sasha, he's super religious, that comes in later. He's like, there needs to be a more active, older, mothering presence in Vazia's life. That's why she keeps running off and doing all these crazy stuff. So you need to remarry. And even though Pyotr is still heartbroken, he's like, you're right. So he decides to go back to Moscow to get married again. He takes his 2 sons, Kolya and Sasha. And Sasha is very like level-headed and responsible. Kolya is very hot-headed and brash and always arrogant. And so Pyotr goes off to Moscow to see the king, his brother-in-law. And so they go there, and the king has an issue because due to political reasons, his son is in danger of not becoming the next king, and instead his nephew becoming the next king. So he's like, in order to undermine that nephew's rights to succession, I need to get him married off to a girl of lower standing to lower his bid for a high seat of kingdom or whatever. And I also need to get rid of my daughter because my daughter is crazy as shit. She's like a girl that is known for screaming and being crazy, right? So when Pyotr rolls up with his two sons, Sasha actually goes and he speaks with a holy man, and that holy man convinces him that he wants that Sasha should be a holy man. And Sasha comes back to his dad and tells his dad, and his dad is like, I'll let you do that on two conditions. One, the next time you talk to that priest, you are fully committing. You can't come back. And two, once you go become a monk, you can never inherit anything from the family. And so that's what's going on with Sasha. The king gives Pyotr a deal. He's like, listen, you're here for a wife. I will wife you to my daughter. And the king is wifing his daughter off because in his mind she's crazy, and like Pyotr lives out in the boonies, so like this is a way to send his daughter off and just let her be secluded. His daughter always thought that she would be going into a convent, like just like to become a nun, because the demons that she sees are actually like these Russian folklore spirits, but because society has moved so far from the veneration of spirits and stuff and more to Christianity that sees things like that as devils, she believes that she sees demons everywhere, and because she sees demons everywhere, everyone thinks that she is crazy. And so it's her dream to go and live in a church, out of a church, and become a nun, because she's like, that's the only place that these demons and shit don't be showing up, because like this area is not sanctified for them. So when she hears of her marriage to Pyotr, she hates it, but I mean, she has no say in it. So she gets married off to Pyotr, and Pyotr is like, I have no clue why the king would give me his very daughter. This is weird, but hey, I need a wife, so I'll agree to that. The second thing the king does is he betroths Pyotr's daughter Olga to his nephew, which would be a lower rank marriage for his nephew, and kind of get his nephew out of the way for the succession of his son, right? All this shit goes down when they visit Moscow. On their way out, Kolya starts fighting this stranger for no reason. He starts bucking up on him, and when he tries to like swing on him, the stranger puts a blade to his neck, and he's like, I'm gonna kill you. And Pyotr's like, no, don't kill my son, please, I'll beg for his life. And the stranger's like, I will let your son live on one condition. Here is a necklace. You have to go give this to your daughter, Vasya, and she has to keep it with her whole life. And so Pyotr makes this promise, and he knows in his heart that this figure is not a normal human, but he's like, I gotta make this deal for my son, you know? They head back to the land that Pyotr owns, rules, called Lesnaya Zemlya, which I'm hopefully saying correctly. The coming autumn, Kolya the brash son gets married, and Olga gets married to the king's nephew. And the king nephew comes over to Lesnaya Zemlya to pick Olga up, and he brings with him a priest, and that priest convinces Sasha, it's the same priest as before, the one that he met before, and convinces Sasha to come back with him and protect the king's son, because the king had apparently gotten sick, and they had hidden his son inside of a monastery, and they're like, yo, we want you to come be a priest and to protect your cousin. This is your calling. And Sasha's like, I believe. So he goes off, and so does Olga, and Kolya stays in town, but he gets married. And so then there's Vasya. But after losing Sasha and Olga, like, she becomes way more withdrawn, And Anna is very, very, very strict with her. And this is as far as her expression as like a wild child and her connection to the magical world because she's literally a witch's child. Case in point, one night, Vazia is talking to the Domovoi, which is a Russian like house spirit that kind of takes care of your house and you kind of take care of it by certain rituals, right? And so Vazia is talking to the Domovoi and Anna sees them and she freaks out. She slaps Vazia and she starts shooing the Domovoi away. And Vazia is like this little like 9-year-old kid, so she's crying. She runs over to the stables, and in the stables she runs into the spirit of the horses called the Vazila. And the Vazila and her become friends. And like this whole course of time is kind of talking about how she starts meeting more of her local spirits and establishing relationships with them. Same time that this is happening, the king is still vying for power in Moscow, right? And I guess Lesnaya has become his favorite place to just dump people he doesn't want to deal with. Because there is a local priest in Moscow that is gaining a lot of attention. He's super beautiful. He paints these beautiful images of like the Virgin Mary and like other different depictions from the Bible. And he's gaining like a lot of following of him. People love him. King is like, we can't have, well, the king's advisor, because the advisor is kind of the one running things now that the king is sick. But he's like, we can't have this outside voice with that much power. So they send him packing out to Lesnaya Zemlya to become the new priest of that town because Anna is dying for a church that she can be safe from all these local spirits in. So he shows up one day and Anna absolutely loves him. She is a bootlicker for this man. And everything that he needs, she's just praising the ground he walks on. All his teaching, she's there, man. She's there. And one night he sees her sneaking out of her house and into the church. So Anna has like this moment with him at night and she tells him how she sees all these demons around and how she, like the church is the only place she feels safe. And he's like, no, you're right, and I think you are chosen and that's why you see these demons, and it's up to you and me to rid this whole place of these demons. And so the next day they come into church and they are raring to go, and he's talking about, I am, it's only God can save you, turn away from these demons, fear the wrath of God if you turn towards the demons, and fear the demons. And he's just preaching fear, 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 fear. And he's so like charismatic as a person that people get really like caught up in his speaking. And as they leave, like even if they don't consciously want to think it, like they start to have a lot of doubts about their local spirits and shit. Vazia is like, guys, like this is not it. So she pulls this prank where she lets out a bunch of crickets during his sermon, and that just like lets him ramp it up to be like, look at how the devils are trying to interrupt my sermon now. But Anna knows that it's Vazia. He takes Vazia in front of the priest. The priest's name is Constantine. And for the priest's approval, she beats the shit out of Vazia right in front of him. And it's like one of those things where it's like, ugh. Like, it's a real pick-me moment, which Anna is super pick-me. And the whole time while she's getting beat, Vazia is staring into Constantine's eyes in defiance. And it's like such a cool moment. But next chapter, we see that things are quickly deteriorating in town now because people are starting to turn away from the local spirits and stuff. And more than that, fear the local spirits. Like, actually work against the nature that they subsist off of. Their relationship with nature is kind of what keeps them alive in this Russian wilderness. And so as they stop leaving out like snacks and stuff for spirits, fire is burning out quickly. The winter is colder than it should be. And then wolves are starving and howling and getting closer to their community, until one day the wolves kill one of the sons of the community. And so they're like, we got to go out and do something about this. So Pyotr gets a hunting party to go out and kill the wolves. And Vazia's like, I feel like there's something a little more magical happening here, because she has that like magical sense. And so she goes out into the winter by herself. She finds this discontented frost spirit and gives it an offering, and it calms the spirit enough for her to let it so she goes out into the woods, into the storm, and she finds like this very discontented frost spirit and gives it an offering and calms it down. But as it's leaving, it gives her a warning that this is only the beginning, and that like even though it was causing the immediate ruckus, it's only a symptom of a bigger problem, and that problem is growing with the destruction of the bond between the spiritual realm and the humans, right? Whole time when Pyotr first came back, he gave the necklace that the stranger that had beat up his son, he gave that necklace to the nursemaid Dunya, and he told Dunya to give it to Vazia when she felt that Vazia was old enough and ready, because he really just put that responsibility off his shoulders. And so then Dunya tried to not give it to Vazia as long as she could. And then the Winter King came to her in a dream and said, you have to give it to her. And she begs in that dream. She's like, I don't think she's ready. Like, let me wait until she's a little older. And the Winter King is like, you know her better than I do, so I'll wait a bit, right? This night that Vazia goes to calm down this frost spirit, he comes again. And he tells her that it's time because his brother is waking up. And she's like, I just need a little more time. And he's like, all right, like I'll give you some more time if that's what you really think is best. This whole time, Anna is being super pick me with Constantine, trying to get his affection and his attention, always trying to be a straight A religious student for him. Like, she loves him, and she is trying to like civilize the community to be like him and follow him. And so while she's chasing him, Constantine is obsessed with Vazia, because she's so magical and she's so captivating and so free and so unbound by him in a way that the rest of the community isn't, that he becomes enamored and obsessed with her, and he can't stop following her. And that makes Anna even more obsessed with him and more spiteful towards Vazia. Real nasty shit. And this whole time, Vazia is like growing as a witch just naturally. She learns from the Vazila how to talk to horses, and she becomes an incredible horse rider bareback, which none of the men or the women in the community can do. So when she's riding through free bareback on a horse and riding better than the men, people are like, that's a witch, you know? And so as she gets more and more witchy, she becomes more and more ostracized by her community, being pushed away in the same way that the spirits are being pushed away. There's also a scene that occurs here where Constantine almost dies to a Russian water spirit called a Rusalka, and Vazia saves his life. And it's another moment where you can see him mentally glomming on deeper onto Vazia, while also saying in his mind, like, in the only way that he can translate that attraction for himself is, I have to tame her. One day he goes and sees Vazia talking to the horses, because like I said, she can talk to horses now. And like from a distance though, so all he sees is her like playing around with horses and laughing and shit, and he gets jealous of that shit because she never smiles or laughs at him, and he's so hungry for her attention. And so he goes over to her and he like talks to her, and then he gives her his wooden cross, which is like a personal item to him. And she's like, okay, whatever. But Anna sees this and Anna gets super jealous. And so Anna comes over and she's like, he meant to give that to me. And she snatches it from Vazia. And Vazia's like, bro, I didn't even want it. Like, bet. But then Anna goes to bed and she can't fall asleep. She can't like rest about this. And so she wakes up early in the morning, or I guess she never sleeps, smacks her husband awake. Doesn't actually smack him awake, but she's like, fine. And he's up and he thinks it's time to squabble or something. He thinks something's really wrong because it's like 5 a.m. and she's never up this early. And so he turns to her, he's like, what? And she's like, you need to marry your daughter off. And he's like, girl, like, I was sleeping. Like, we can't talk about this another time. And she was like, you need to marry her off now. And he's like, okay, I will go and talk about it. So he goes and he talks to Dunya about it. And during this conversation, he is reminded by Dunya of the Winter King's promise about how she has to give the necklace to Vazia. And by now, Constantine has kind of convinced the entire community besides Vazia that the spirits are evil and shit. So both of them really, really fear the Winter King. And it's not like he had like a sparkly, clean image anyway. Like, nature is powerful and it is not beholden to us. When he's reminded of this, he's like, Dunya and him come up with this idea that like if we marry Vazia off to a man, then she can no longer be wedded to the spiritual, that being Morosco, or the Winter King. So both of them are like, okay, bet, let's get her married off. They find this dude named Kirill, and he's a fucking piece of shit. Like, he's like known for sleeping with women around town. He's impregnated like 5 women. Meets Vazia. He starts trying to touch up on her and talk down on her and just be a general piece of shit, you know? And the whole time, Vazia styles on him. So like eventually he runs away because she just proves herself. Her younger brother is on a runaway horse and she hops on a horse and fucking saves that situation. It's lickety split. And Kirill is like, peace, like this girl is too crazy for me. And I was like, yes. During this time, Vazia is still running into more spirits that's giving her more warnings of winter coming, of the bear awakening, of like all these warnings, you know, letting her know that shit is getting worse. And you know, Vazia really, really didn't want to marry because she doesn't want to be tied down, especially not to some random asshole. But she really didn't want to get married because getting married means she was going to go marry away, and she's the only thing still keeping the spirits alive and keeping her community fighting against winter coming in. So she's like, if I get sent away, my community is grits. So after the marriage falls through, immediately Anna's like, bro, I still need this bitch out of here. So she goes back to Pyotr and she's like, listen, if marriage doesn't work, we gotta send that girl to a convent. Pyotr is like, okay, again. And so he goes to Constantine and he tells Constantine, like, do you have any good convents that I can send my daughter? And you know, Constantine is hungry for nobody to have Vazia but him. Like, when he found out that Vazia was getting married, he was super, super sad, even though he can't marry her because he's a priest, but he doesn't want anyone to have her then. So when he hears that she might be going to a convent, he's like, bet, I think that's the best thing for her, man. Meanwhile, a couple days later, while they're planning to send her to a convent, Pyotr goes hunting with Kolya, and while they're hunting, they come across a buck that is eviscerated. And they're just like, yo, what the fuck could have done this to this buck? And as they continue to like search the woods and stuff, like there are no tracks or anything as to what killed this buck. And as time passes on, they find dead dogs, they find dead horses. It's like something is stalking the land right now. And then November comes and Constantine is painting his paintings inside of his like little figurines inside of his room, and this girl named Agafia comes, and she's a woman and she has a son, and she's like, yo, my baby is struggling. Like, winter's been so hard. I know, like, I'm supposed to be having faith in God and everything, but shit is rough, bro. And I feel like ever since you came, shit is rough. Like, what do you say about that? He tells her that the only thing that can help is if she fears God. And after he sends her away, then the shadows start speaking to him. And the shadows tell him, invoke my titles and I will give you power, you know? And so when they're in church the next day, Constantine says, I invoke thee, God who has called me to be his servant, the voice out of darkness, lover of storms, be thou present among us. And then behind like the vision of Jesus on the cross, a monstrous shadow appears behind it and with one eye. And like the entire church just starts freaking out. But then Constantine like calls them all to order. He's like, believe in God, fear God, and we will get through this and you'll be safe, right? That night, Anna asks her daughter, Irina, to go bring Constantine to her. Anna asks why he doesn't look at her the way that he looks at Vasia. And Constantine tells her, there's not that much to see here. That night, Vasia is sleeping in the stables because she be doing that sometimes to make sure that the spirit in there is all right. And she hears some commotion outside, and she peeks outside the barn, and she sees a spirit walk through the wall of her house into her house. And so she's like, oh shit. And so she's running out there to go deal with it. And as she's walking up, the spirit hops back out, and she meets it face to face, and she realizes it's that same figure that she met when she was a child beneath that tree with one eye. And she looks into that one eye and she sees madness, and she feels herself falling into it. But then she feels like a figure, an ice cold figure, show up behind her, even though she can't look behind her. And it tells homie that she's looking at, not yet, brother. And so homie lets her go. And then whoever's behind her wraps her up in a cloak, and then it's like she just wakes up in the stables again, and she's like, yo, was that real? Was that fake? What the fuck just happened to me? When she wakes up, she's still kind of wondering if she's dreaming, but then she hears screaming, and she goes out and she finds Agafia, the girl, the woman at the beginning of the chapter that went to Constantine for help, and finds out that Agafia's child had died and she was mourning it. And she goes to the domovoi and she asks him what happened last night. She was like, yo, how that spirit get in here? And the domovoi was like, madness came and I'm too weak now because no one believes in me and no one gives me shit, and so I can't keep him out no more. And so Vasia is like, I will feed you my very blood to keep you fed. And so she starts doing this going forward. She gives her blood and she's getting weaker and weaker in order to keep her local spirits strong enough to keep madness out of her home. Agafia never recovered from losing her child, and one day she just wanders out into the cold and dies. The night after her funeral, the Winter King comes back into Dunya's dreams, and he's like, why have you not given that damn necklace? And you know, by this point, Dunya is no longer waiting for the right time. She's really just trying to make sure that he never gets that necklace into Vasia's hands, because to her, that's her wedding Vasia to the supernatural. When she rejects him this time, he gives her a vision of a dead Vasia blaming Dunya for allowing her to die by not giving her that necklace. And so when Dunya wakes up, she's like, all right, like, ain't no more games. Like, I need to give this to Vasia because I don't want her to be dead. The next morning, Vasia's brother Alyosha comes to get her because he's like, Dunya won't wake up out of her sleep, and she's just repeating your name in her sleep over and over again. And so Vasia runs over because Dunya is the most consistent mother figure she's ever had, and she's like nursing Dunya, trying to keep her well, and Constantine is trying to come over and say like funeral rites and shit to her to like relax her into death, and she's like, fuck you, I'm gonna try and keep her alive, get away from me. And so she just there all day trying to take care of Dunya. And then at night, Dunya actually wakes up a bit, and she gives the necklace to Vazia, and she says, always keep this with you. And then she warns Vazia, and she was like, his brother Madness is coming, be careful. As she's giving this warning, there's a knock at the door. And when Vazia runs to go confront whatever that knock is, she sees a hunched figure jump and break into Constantine's window. She goes in and she sees that Constantine is having like a horny dream about her. She doesn't know it's about her, but he's having a horny dream about her. And he thinks he's about to kiss Vazia. And the figure is like almost bites down on his neck. But Vazia comes in, banishes it. It runs out the window. She goes back to Dunya. And as she's like coaxing Dunya into a peaceful death, suddenly a shadow busts open the front door, appears like in front of Dunya, and Dunya has like a very like visceral, fearful death as she's staring at whatever this figure is. And then that figure like takes her spirit. Vazia is just heartbroken because Dunya dies with fear in her eyes, and she was like, she was so afraid when she died. The next morning, all the women, not all the women, but the women of the community wrap Dunya up, and they're doing like funeral rites. But Vazia takes her brother Alyosha to the cemetery because she's like, I know what that was that attacked Constantine last night. It was a Upir, which is basically the Russian vampire. And so they're digging up the graves to find where this Upir is, and they find the grave that this like stench is coming from, the stench of death, and underneath it is a pristine looking Agafia, and the only way to kill it is to stake it through the brain. And so there's a really graphic scene of them doing that. When Vazia comes back, she gets beaten by Anna for being a terrible child who missed the funeral for Dunya. She calls her ungrateful, shits on her, just classic Anna stuff. Suddenly, a knock comes to the door from this dude that shows up from a village that's a 2 days ride away. This is the middle of winter too. No one should be riding through this shit, but he shows up frozen, and turns out that a village a 2 days ride from here, under the purview of Piotr's land, burned down, and everyone there are like refugees. So homie had written 2 days, and he was like, yo, we need you to come and stage like a rescue to come and take care of us. And Vazia is like, you can't go, dad, because like if you leave, this whole shit back home is going to fall apart. Like shit is not sweet right now. And Piotr is like, I have no choice. Like, these are my people. I have to respond to this. So Piotr gets a coterie together, and they all go to help that village that burned down. That night, they hear weeping and stuff from outside, and when Vazia goes to check outside, she sees a figure out there. She's like, oh shit, like, this is scary. But because she's feeding the Dome of Void, it can't get in. And this keeps happening, it keeps coming. And then one night, she hears the horses freaking out. So she runs out to the stables, and she sees an Upir biting into the neck of one of the horses. And she's like, oh shit, get the fuck out of here. And when the Upir turns, she realizes it's the dead Dunya. And this absolutely shatters her heart. And then Dunya runs out into the night. The shadowy spirit, the one-eyed dark shadowy spirit that Constantine has started worshiping, that he believes is Christ, is telling him that he has to get rid of Vazia ASAP because she's the only thing stopping him over and over again. He's like, you need to do this quickly. So then Constantine goes to Anna, and he's like, listen, Piotr's gone, we got to get rid of Vazia. And, you know, Anna cannot wait. So they immediately tell her, like, you got to go to a convent. And she's like, I'm not going to a convent. I don't give a fuck what y'all say. And so Anna gives her a deal. She tells Vazia that if Vazia can go into the dead of winter and get these flowers called snowdrops and bring them back to her daughter Irina, then she will allow Vazia not to go to the convent. And Vazia is like, fuck it. I would rather die in the freezing cold wilderness trying to save my community than just quietly go to a convent. So she's putting all her shit ready to go. And as she leaves, Constantine stops her and he's like, please don't go, because like I said, he loves her. Nasty love, but still. And so he's like, please don't go. And she's like, listen, I'm going. And he actually brought two dudes to ambush her. And so they grab her from behind and they're like, you're going in this convent, because they're going to kidnap her and take her. And as they're dragging her, she like goes a little limp. And so they like chill a bit because they're like, ah, she's a girl. And then she goes, bang! She knocks one out. Not actually knocks him out, but she knocks him back, shakes the other one loose, and she runs straight into the woods. And then she loses herself into the woods, and she's wandering around, freezing cold, dying slowly. And she's at some point, she's like, I maybe made a mistake, because dying is painful as fuck, and I don't think I'm gonna make it. At some point, though, she runs into that same tree that she found in her childhood. She like enters that magical grove, and then there's that tree again. And the one-eyed figure is under the tree beckoning her once more. And she's getting closer and closer. She can't resist it. She feels her body being compelled. But before she can get there, the dark cloaked figure comes through on his horse again, yoinks her up, and rides away until like they're running through the cold. And so she's like, yo, I need a break. And so he puts her down. And then he starts choking her, and she's like, what the fuck? And she's like, who are you? And he's like, he says some magical shit like, I come with the snow, and I'm the one who knocks when your eyelids are closed and shit. And she's like, I know you wouldn't just save me to kill me. He's like, yeah, you're right about that. I'm not actually going to kill you. That was just a test. Which is like, bro, does she still need tests right now? Like, this is not the time. But then he asks her how she ended up out there by that tree, and she tells him, and he's like, all right, like, I got you. And so he starts carrying her somewhere, and she falls asleep. When she wakes up in a cabin / like open grove. She's waking up in his home, which is both a cabin and nature itself. And so like, depending on what she believes, she's flashing between the two. But basically, her and homie get close in this cabin over the course of days, and time works differently here. So he's like, you can spend forever, and when you leave, it'll be the time that we hopped in here. So over the course of weeks, he's like nursing her to health, teaching her a little bit more about her magic. The two of them are bonding, and his horse has a child called Solove, which means Nightingale. And that horse, well, it's not really a horse because it's also a nightingale. It's a spirit, but it also takes the form of a horse a lot. And that nightingale comes in bonds with Vazia, so they're like ace boon coons now. And then Morosco tells Vazia the story of him and his brother Medved. So Morosco is winter, death, and his brother is like the other side of that, and he represents fear. He tells her how like he bound his brother a long time ago, but now his brother is growing more in power because of people stopping the practices that keep him bound. And so he's warning her that she has to prepare her community. And Morosco says that he plans to bind Medved once again during midwinter when Morosco is at his strongest. And Vazia's like, let me help. And Morosco is like, no, you should just go live a perfectly human life. And she's like, I'm not feeling that. So she runs away. She comes back. They talk it out. And when she comes back, he actually leaves her with all these gifts, right, that she can take back. And the basket of snowdrops that her mother demanded that she bring back in her impossible task. And she takes the snowdrops, but she refuses to take the gifts. Whole time, Medved goes back to Constantine, because the demon that Constantine has been talking to is Medved. And Medved goes back to Constantine, and he's like, hey, yo, what happened? I told you to get rid of Vazia. Now she's in the hands of my brother. And Constantine is like, brother? Christ doesn't have a brother. And Medved is like, you idiot fuck. You don't realize that I'm not Christ yet. I'm not Christ. I'm Medved. And you better do what I want you to do, or else your soul is damned. And so Constantine is like, what do I got to do for you to let me go? And Medved is like, I need you to get me a witch. I need you to give me someone who can see the magical world. And Constantine is like, I don't have Vazi anymore. Like, I don't know what to do. And Medved is like, you know someone else that can see magical shit. And Constantine is like, oh, bet. And he has no qualms about serving Anna up on a platter. He tells Anna, like, just trust me. Takes her to the secluded tree that Medved told him to take Anna to, and then he leaves her. And he just listens as she screams and screams and screams when Medved shows up in front of her, as he just feeds off her fear, and she is mentally tortured by him. And Constantine is like, well, peace. Vazir comes back right after this, and she goes to her home, and she runs into Alyosha and Irina, and they're like, oh my god, you're alive, and they all embrace. And then she's like, so where is Anna? Irina and her brother are like, she's probably inside the church like she usually is. So Vazir goes to the church and runs into Constantine as he comes back from leaving Anna in the woods. And she's like, what happened to Anna? And eventually she finds out what he did. And she's like, fuck, Medved has his witch. He might like be setting free soon. So she's like, fuck you, Constantine. I better never see your ass here again. And she runs out to the woods to go save Anna. Really to save her community, but also to save Anna. She hops on her new Nightingale horse named Solove, and she pulls her brother Alyosha onto the back, and they run into the middle of the woods to confront Medved. All this fear that Anna has been feeding Medved has unleashed his true form, which is this huge, almost larger than life bear. Like spiritually, his energy is larger than the world itself, but physically he is just a ginormous bear. And Anna's just screaming in front of him, and Alyosha and Vazir show up. And then Morozko also shows up, and a big battle ensues. And Vazir summons all the local spirits and shit that she had been talking to and building relationships with. The Domovoy, the Vazila, the Rasulka, like she calls them all, and it's just a huge fucking fight breaking out. Despite this, Medved is free and unbound, so he is defeating everyone. Like, no matter how many people they bring, he is just fucking up everybody. And when it looks like they're losing, out of nowhere, here comes Pyotr returning from his expedition to the other village. And he shows up in the clearing, and he sees Medved, and he understands like all those stories and shit that he had been trying so hard to ignore. Like, it's just in front of him, and he's like, I need to save my children, because he sees Medved about to kill him. And he stands in front of him, and he says, I remember the old ways. I will make a deal with you. He offers a deal to Medved, sacrificing his life in order to rebind Medved, and throws his body in front of Medved's blow, ensuring that Medved kills him and activates that contract. And immediately Medved shrinks back down to his bound form, and Vazia and Alyosha are forced to mourn their father. Pyotr is buried between his two wives, his original wife, which was Vazia's mother, Marina, and his shitty wife, Anna. And Vazia is now free to do whatever she wants. So the book ends with her setting off with Solove to go find her fortune in the world. And it's part of a series, so I'm very excited to see the rest of the series. But this is such an incredible book. One of my favorites of the year. I gave it 5 stars. When you think about reading a fairy tale, this is what you want to read. It is about community. It contains a lot of lessons about life and parables, and it is also brought into the modern age to examine a lot of things that older fairy tales and stuff wouldn't analyze. and give voice to certain narratives that weren't really given voice to in like the original fairy tales. Because if you read a fairy tale, they're very brief and they aren't as magical as we tend to think of them as. And I think this was such a beautiful retelling. And so that's all for me, and hopefully this video is what I want it to be. Peace.